associated with a Boy Scout troop hot dog hamburger kind of sell. And so there were about, I don't know, 150 cases around that many of Staphylococcus foodborne intoxication. So it was on a Saturday. The cookout was starting at 11 o'clock. By the time 3 o'clock came around, Georgetown Hospital, they were already talking because they had already seen about 6 cases of Staphylococcus food poisoning on an hourly basis. By the time we started to put 2 and 2 together, Round Rock was already experiencing about the same number. So when Georgetown got on the phone and called Round Rock, they already had about 43 cases of Staphylococcus food poisoning. Round Rock had about 28. They called Seton Northwest, they had about 18. And they called Seton Central, and they only had 1. And they called BRAC, and BRAC hadn't had any. And so what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that whoever was up north, something was in common up there was causing them to have. So when they started talking about this and they started asking questions, where were you at? What time were you there? And who were you there with? Well, a lot of them said, and besides, there were like 15 Boy Scout troops that actually came down with food poisoning. And so what they did then is they went to this place and they pulled out all the condiments, they pulled everything out that were used, and they tested everything, and it was pickle relish that actually had the toxin in it. And so everybody who used pickle relish or mixed pickle relish in with other food, guess what? They got sick. So, so this is talking about the prodromal or the incubation period and things like that. This particular slide I have actually done this with. This is my own thing. You're not going to find this in any particular text itself. But if you look at this, typically we are happy campers, and as long as we don't get exposed to anything, we continue to be happy. But we can be exposed to something, and from the time we're exposed to something to the time we develop clinical symptoms, that period of time is called the incubation period. And so the incubation period varies from infectious agent to infectious agent. Right? In that time period, you can have some preclinical symptoms that you might not even know about. So for instance, if I was exposed to HIV and I serologically converted to HIV, and since I gave blood today, if they might call me up and say, you've tested positive for HIV. I don't have any other symptoms at this point, but I have a preclinical symptom that says I've serologically converted to HIV positive, right? So what does that mean? Well, at some point I've been exposed. I haven't started to see any clinical symptoms, but I do have some preclinical or subclinical symptoms that I have from the blood test. From the time you start to have symptoms, and it can be influenza or whatever, you go seek treatment, and when you seek treatment, you can have 3 outcomes. One, you convalesce and get better, which is always good. Secondly, you can die, which typically is not good. And I say that, but I'm very cognizant to the fact that people who have end-stage renal disease or who have terminal cancer, you know, especially with my own experiences with my dad, it was kind of welcoming to him, and I think to us, that he just passed away because he was in so much pain. So I say most of the time, death is not a good thing. And you can be impaired. And you can be impaired physically, right? So I have, if I'm exposed to meningococcal meningitis and I come down with meningitis, I might have neuromuscular impairment so that I'm not able to walk properly. I'm not able to maybe reach out for this glass because my synapses aren't firing like they should. And so I'm physically impaired. But also you can be cognitively impaired, right? And so in that case, I probably wouldn't be able to do this job because the amount of higher level thoughts that actually have to go through my mind when I'm even giving a lecture like this. When I'm talking to you guys, I'm thinking about a bunch of other things up here. How am I going to say this? And it all comes out at one point or another, right? And so I wouldn't be able to do that maybe. And so then I probably would be considered disabled or have to do something else or have to sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, being impaired can be a lot more devastating than some other things. you look at descriptive epidemiology, it's really the tabulation of data. Remember, we like to see data because it tells us a lot of things. Do you remember, or have you ever seen the movie Erin Brockovich? If you have not seen the movie Erin Brockovich, it would be a nice movie to watch maybe over the holiday season when you don't have anything else to do. Right? It's a pretty good movie and scientific, and it's pretty it is a little bit sensationalized. Plus, it has Julia Roberts in a very, very tight little shorts and things like that. So, but you know, I think they just did that to influence the males to want to watch it more often. But it is pretty good scientific, right? And so that's all based on hexavalent chromium that was in the water in that particular community. And all these individuals were being exposed to that, and they were coming on with all these crazy cancers. And so you can see how that might work because of that. Now, local epidemiology, it's really, a lot of times it's retrospectively done. And so right now, all the data that we're looking at as epidemiologists is from 2 years ago, because we just don't have the manpower to actually do active surveillance. We're doing retrospective surveillance. And so when we finish looking at data, we'll make changes to policies of how we're going to handle certain things. But guess what, Rosie? When we make those changes, the entire environment's already changed before we even make those changes, because we're here, we're 2 years later, right? And so what we're doing the best we can as quick as we can. Experimental, a lot of times if we think the cause of this is a toxin by Staph aureus, well, we can test that. We can actually make sure of that. And before we make a move to make any kind of changes to the population, we want to be sure that we know what the organism is or what the toxin is, because we don't want to make a launch which might make things even worse. And so when we talk about the way things can be transmitted, there's some different groups of transmission. First one is contact transmission, and so that can be direct, indirect, or droplet nuclei. So I have influenza, I'm sneezing up here. When I'm sneezing, essentially Aaron and Clay and Anna and Alma, they're all indirectly being exposed to me with me. But if I go over and I hug Alma, right now she's directly being exposed. And if I come over here and I'm sneezing and I sneeze it in my hand and I open this door, now I've actually transferred the virus that probably causes my influenza to this doorknob, and anybody who opens this door now has the virus on their hands, and if they do this, then simply you pick up the virus. It's very easy to pick up that kind of virus. If you've ever noticed, a lot of times when I open the door, I don't let it shut again, I open it for you, and I leave it open, right? And simply, that's just because I'm cognizant that I don't want anybody touching the doorknobs. And it's just really crazy to me when I go into the men's room and people finish their business and just walk out the door. And so I wash my hands, I have my little towel with me, I open the doors with my towel, and then as I'm leaving, I throw that towel away. Right now, I'm not too crazy about this when I go like to work out at 24-hour Fitness or HEB. You know, I see people scrubbing everything down. I'm not that crazy. But I just, you know, when you're in a public restroom, that's it.
Well, ever since you said that,
Have you noticed?
no, but I wonder when I shake like Lynn's hands.
Well, I'm going to tell you something that probably you're not going to like. Women are worse.
Well, maybe they are, but they're not, you know.
I know I don't know. Enlighten me. I'm afeared for what you might say. So we're moving quickly right along. Okay. There could be vehicle transmission, which is airborne, waterborne, or foodborne. And there could be vector transmission, and vector transmission can be through either a biological vector or a mechanical vector. Biological vector is what? Give me an example. Mosquito, right? Comes in and takes a blood meal and leaves maybe something behind, like West Nile virus, or if you're in South America or in Africa or Asia, malaria, right? A mechanical vector is different. Name the most important mechanical vector there is. Either a fly or a cockroach.
That's
Mechanical, right? So think of the fly. Lands on some poop outside in the backyard, picks up a little Shigella, flies in the window, and, you know, Erin's eating some lasagna, lands on a lasagna, and leaves off Shigella. Now Erin's got Shigella, she goes to the doctor, and they say, you have idiopathic shigellosis. You're the only one in the family that has it, so we don't know why, but you have it. We're gonna treat you. The cockroach is the other one. The cockroach is just as vile. It's outside, it's walking around, it walks over some coon poo, and then sneaks in the house, and then gets into your cereal, and just kind of chomps away at some of the cereal. And, 3 days later, Tara, you go, you pour your cereal out, and then something falls into your cereal bowl, right? Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it happens a lot in Corpus. Because in Corpus we have a lot of roaches. So, and they're big too, right? Oh, hold on a minute now. So, yeah, so anyway, in Corpus, the roaches are so big you can hear them coming a block away. They're that big. And sometimes they hit you in the head, you know, everything crazy. Well, okay, now, so in Corpus, if you're more affluent, like I grew up in a barrio, but I had a lot of friends because I got buzzed. And so I'd go over to their house all the time. And so every once in a while, we'd see one in there, because everybody's got it, right? We'd see one or two in the house. And the mother would always say, Jerry, please take that water bug out. Or the palmetto bug, right? And so I came back to the house, and there were some roaches in the house, and Dad was stomping on them. And I said, Dad, you just killed a palmetto bug. And he looked at me and said, you've been hanging out with your white friends too long. These are roaches.
I just know a lot of my friends, like, if they live, like, next to oak trees,
The palm trees in Corpus are notorious for
But
roaches.
I thought that's why they call palmetto, because in Florida, they
Mainly it's because people think that roaches are unhygienic, and so they don't want to say they have roaches, right? They'll call up the exterminator and say, can you come to our house for palmetto bugs? And they'll turn around, hang up the phone and say, I'm gonna go kill some roaches, yeah? So, yes, sir.
Can you just clarify the difference between biological and mechanical?
Biological vector is something that's going to transmit an infectious agent directly into the body. Mosquito, a tritone bug, a louse, something like that, because they're taking a blood meal. Mechanical is that the organism is going to land on something that's contaminated and then bring that with their legs or whatever and land on some food or something and then transfer indirectly the infectious agent from wherever they were at poop usually to whatever food stuff it is. Okay. Yes, sir?
An example of indirect you gave was doorknob, is that the indirect?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Can someone run their backpack on the table outside? It was there when I,
It's not.
oh, it's full, okay.
It's yours, Chris?
Yeah, it's cool. There's nothing in it.
Let's bring him.
So I didn't realize.
It's like a whole table of stuff. There's carrots and all kinds of things out there. I'd sit down there and, you know, open up a backpack, read a magazine out of it, eat some carrots while I'm there. When we talk about epidemiology, we've already talked about port of entries, how organisms get into the body. But as epidemiologists, we also worry about port of exits because the way that the pathogens leave the body is going to dictate how those pathogens can get into other people's bodies. So can you guys appreciate the fact that if I have shigellosis, it's going to leave through the feces of the body, right? And therefore it leaves that way, then how is it going to be communicated to somebody else? Mouth, right? So fecal oral route. Where if I have influenza and I'm sneezing and coughing, what's going to be the mode of transmission? It's going to leave my body through either my nose or my mouth, and it's going to enter Anna's body how? She's going to breathe it in and drop a nuclei, right? So it's important that we know that because if we know things are leaving the body a certain way, we can intervene and say, be sure you wash your hands. And that's why anytime we work with salmonella here, I always say, be sure you wash your hands before you leave today. Because the route of transmission for salmonella is not in the eye or the blood, it simply is fecal oral, right? Hand contamination to carrots, and then the carrots are contaminated, and then they come down with an infection. Communicable versus non-communicable, I've already talked about this. If it's communicable,